The night Brian sobbed in Frida's small apartment was the night everything changed. It was not the night of a miracle, but of something far more complicated. Something that would bind them together in ways none of them had ever imagined. There was a couple named Sophia and Brian. They had been married for 7 years but didn't have a child. They were rich, influential, and had a lot of power. But their only problem was that they didn't have a child. They had been to the finest doctors in Lagos, the best clinics across Nigeria, and even flew to South Africa twice for treatment. Each time hope flickered, but it never stayed. Sophia's womb was too fragile. It couldn't hold the life they so desperately wanted. She had suffered miscarriages, 3 of them, each more heartbreaking than the last. Each one took a piece of her, and after the third, she could no longer try. Her body had given up, but her heart refused to. One evening, after yet another doctor's visit, Sophia pleaded with Brian for them to try surrogacy, saying it was their only option left. Brian had always been hesitant. The thought of another woman carrying their child felt strange to him. But he knew how much Sophia wanted this. She had been through so much, and he couldn't bear to see her in pain any longer. So after months of consideration, Brian agreed. They didn't want just anyone to carry their child. They wanted someone they could trust, someone they could help in return. That is when they thought of Frida. Frida was an orphan, barely 22 years, who sold fruits on the roadside not far from their house. She was quiet, polite, and always looked tired. One afternoon, as Sophia bought oranges from her, she struck up a conversation. Frida had been alone for years, struggling to survive. She had no family, no one to rely on. That is when the idea hit Sophia. Maybe Frida could be their surrogate. They could help her with the money she needed, and she could help them by carrying their child. It seems like the perfect solution. Sophia and Brian invited Frida over to their house and approached her with the offer, 5 million naira. That was the amount they promised her for carrying their child. Frida was shocked, hesitant at first, but the offer was too good to refuse. She had been living hand to mouth for years, and this money could change her life forever. After some thought, she finally agreed. The couple made everything official with their lawyer. Frida signed a contract agreeing to carry the child, and in return, she would receive the payment after the baby was born. The contract also stated she would have no claim to the child after birth. Frida was fine with that. She just wanted to help them and also secure her own future. A week later, they registered Frida in their family hospital that they have been using for years. And after a series of tests conducted on her, the test at the hospital came back positive. Frida was healthy and able to carry the child. The doctors gave them an appointment for the surrogacy process, and after a few weeks of waiting, it was confirmed. Frida was pregnant. To ensure Frida's well-being, Brian and Sophia moved her into a small apartment close to their house. Everything seems to be going smoothly. Sophia was excited, already making plans for the baby. She visited Frida often, bringing her groceries, checking on her health, and even buying little gifts for the baby. But then, something unexpected happened. One evening, Frida was coming down the stairs in her apartment when she slipped and fell. The pain hit her instantly, sharp and deep. She knew something was wrong. Rushing to the hospital, her worst fears were confirmed. She had lost the baby. The news shattered her. Frida sat in the hospital bed, staring at the wall, wondering how she could tell Brian and Sophia. She knew how much they had invested in this pregnancy, how much they wanted the baby. She felt like she had failed them. Days passed and Frida couldn't bring herself to tell Sophia. Instead, she called Brian. She invited him over, saying she had something important to discuss. When he arrived, she couldn't hold back the tears. After much persuasion, she finally revealed the heartbreaking news. Brian was devastated. The grief hit him harder than he expected. He had been so hopeful, imagining holding his child in just a few months. Now, that dream was gone. As he sat on Frida's couch, his face in his hands, Frida reached out to comfort him. They were both lost in their sorrow, and in that moment of vulnerability, something unexpected happened. They made love. The night after Brian and Frida made love, they barely looked at each other again. An invincible wall of shame and guilt now stood between them. Brian kept his distance, trying to avoid any contact with Frida, while Frida herself felt the weight of what had happened but said nothing. It was only Sophia who kept coming by, still in the dark about everything. She continued visiting Frida, bringing her gifts, food, and lovely things for the baby. Her face lighting up every time she spoke about the child she believed was growing in Frida's womb. Brian watched it all silently, torn apart by guilt. He couldn't look at Sophia without feeling like he was carrying a mountain on his back. Every time Sophia returned home from Frida's house, talking about how much she couldn't wait to be a mother, Brian felt a wave of nausea washed over him. The weight of the lies he was living under grew heavier every day. Frida had lost the baby weeks ago and Sophia didn't know. Worse still, Brian had made the situation even more complicated by giving in to temptation that one awful night. Weeks passed and the secret weighed on Brian like an anchor. He knew he couldn't keep it hidden forever. Sophia deserved to know the truth. One afternoon, as they sat in their living room, with Sophia happily browsing through baby catalogs, Brian finally made the decision to come out clean. His palms were sweaty, his heart pounding in his chest. He was about to confess it all: the miscarriage, the night he spent with Frida, the unbearable guilt that had been eating him alive. But just as he opened his mouth to speak, his phone rang. The screen flashed Frida's name. Brian hesitated, unsure whether to answer, but something in the urgency of her call made him pick up. "Brian, come to my house now," Frida said, her voice shaky. "It's important." Brian glanced at Sophia, who was still lost in the catalog, and told her he had to step out for a bit. Sophia looked up, slightly puzzled, but didn't question him. She trusted him as she always had. Brian rushed over to Frida's apartment, his mind racing with all the possible things she could want to tell him. Had she decided to come clean to Sophia? Was she going to blackmail him? The possibilities scared him, but he had no choice but to find out. When he arrived, Frida was sitting on the couch in the living room, holding a piece of paper. Her face was serious, her eyes locking with ease the moment he stepped inside. Without saying a word, she handed him the paper. Brian looked down and read it. His heart stopped. It was a pregnancy test result. Frida was pregnant again. This time, there was no mistaking what it meant. The child she was carrying wasn't the result of the surrogacy plan they had made with Sophia. No, this child was his and Frida's. For a long moment, Brian just stood there, the paper trembling in his hand. He couldn't process it. His mind swelled with fear, regret, and confusion. How could this have happened? It was only one night, a mistake, a moment of weakness. And now it had turned into something much bigger. Frida, he whispered, his voice shaking. This can't be happening. It's happening, Brian, Frida said quietly. And what are we going to do about it? Brian felt the walls closing in on him. He had to make a decision, and quickly. He couldn't tell Sophia, not now, not like this. The news would destroy her. She had already endured so much heartache, and now this? It would break her. We can't let Sophia know, Brian said, his voice low, pleading. This will kill her. I can't let this happen. Please, Frida, we have to keep this between us. Frida crossed her arms, watching him with a cold expression. Keep it between us? Do you think I'm just going to carry your child without asking for anything in return? No, Brian, it doesn't work like that. Brian's heart sank. What do you want? Frida smiled slightly, but it wasn't a kind smile. If you want me to keep quiet, you're going to have to do everything I say. No questions asked. Brian felt a pit forming in his stomach. He knew Frida could ask for anything. Money, property, favors, and he would be forced to comply. But he had no choice. He couldn't let Sophia find out. Not now, not ever. Fine, Brian said after a long pause. I will do whatever you want. Just don't tell Sophia. Frida's smile grew wider. Good. Then I will start with something simple. I need more money, Brian. You're going to open a jewelry shop for me. I will need a new car too. You will make that happen, won't you? Brian nodded numbly, not fully processing the gravity of what he had just agreed to. I will make it happen. Good. And Brian, Frida added, her voice turning icy. You will give me more of your time and attention. I am carrying your child now. I hope you understand this. Brian swallowed hard, feeling the chains tightening around him. He had walked into a trap, and now there was no way out. Frida had him exactly where she wanted him. All he could do was nod and agree to her terms. Yes, I understand, Brian muttered, his head hanging low. As Brian left Frida's apartment that night, he felt as though the world had grown darker. The secret he now carried was far heavier than anything he had ever imagined. He had betrayed his wife, and now he was being controlled by the very woman who was supposed to help them build their family. And worst of all, Sophia still had no idea. As the months passed, Brian's life had spiraled into a mess of secret, guilt and constant demands. Frida never gave him a moment's peace, always needing something. My baby needs you, Brian, she would say with a smirk, her eyes glittering as she continued. He needs your touch. He wants fresh fish. Frida used her pregnancy as a leash around Brian's neck, dragging him to her every whim. It wasn't just the food and attention she wanted. She enjoyed the power she had over him. Brian was no longer the man he used to be. The confident, responsible husband Sophia had married seems to fade away, replaced by someone who was constantly anxious, distracted, and burdened by secret. Sophia noticed the change, of course. She saw how often Brian was away, and though he made excuses, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Still, her excitement for the baby kept her hopeful. She visited Frida regularly, bringing her food and fruit, her heart filled with joy as she imagined holding her baby soon. The thought of becoming a mother kept her going, not knowing that the child Frida was carrying no longer shared her blood. The demand from Frida only grew as her pregnancy progressed. Brian, desperate to keep Sophia from finding out the truth, gave in to everything. One day, he called Frida, telling her to get ready because he was taking her to see the new store he had opened for her in the city. When Frida saw the jewelry shop, fully stocked with sparkling goods, she beamed with excitement. A week later, he bought her a new car, something flashy and beautiful. Frida felt like she had hit the jackpot. With the shop, the car, and the baby growing inside her, she felt powerful, like she had finally achieved everything she wanted. But her demands didn't stop there. One afternoon, Frida called Brian and told him he needed to take her to the hospital for a doctor's appointment. She wanted to run a scan to find out the sex of the baby. Brian hesitated. Sophia had started growing much suspicious, asking more questions about his whereabouts and why he spent so much time with Frida. But Frida insisted, saying, "I need to know the sex of my baby." After much persuasion, Brian had no choice but to agree. He picked Frida up from her apartment and drove her to the hospital, all the while feeling a tight knot of anxiety in his stomach. When they arrived, the doctor performed the scan. Brian stood there, nervously watching the screen as the doctor examined Frida's belly. Then, the doctor's face lit up with surprise. "Congratulations," the doctor said, smiling at them both. "You are expecting twins, a boy and a girl." Brian's heart leaped in his chest. Twins? He couldn't believe it. Despite the mess he had created, the news of two babies filled him with unexpected joy. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel excited. Two children, a boy and a girl. He was going to be a father twice over. On the drive home, Frida was glowing with pride, but Brian's thoughts turned darker. He thought of Sophia, his wife, who had been so hopeful, so excited, who believed that Frida was carrying her child. He thought about how devastated she would be when she found out the truth. And that is when the idea came to him. When they arrived back at Frida's apartment, Brian turned to her with a desperate look in his eyes. "Frida, I have to ask you for something," he began slowly, his voice almost pleading. "Please, can you give one of the twins to Sophia? She's been expecting this baby for so long. She deserves to be a mother too." Frida's expression immediately turned cold. Her excitement vanished, replaced with anger. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "These are my baby. My children, Brian. Both of them. I am not giving one of them to your wife. Never. It's not going to happen." Brian tried to reason with her, his voice soft but filled with desperation. "Frida, please. Sophia is so much expectant. She believes one of these babies is hers. If you give her one, it will make her happy. You will still have a child. I will still support you. Please, think about it." But Frida wasn't having any of it. She crossed her arms and shook her head, her voice hard. "No, Brian, these are my kids, not hers. I am the one carrying them. I am the one who has been going through this pregnancy. Sophia has nothing to do with this." Brian's heart sank. He couldn't believe how firm Frida was being. He had hoped she might show some compassion, but her response was clear. She wasn't going to give up either of her children, and the reality of what that meant began to crush him. Frida's refusal left him devastated. Not only had he betrayed Sophia, but now he had no way of giving her the baby she had dreamed of for so long. Frida had all the power now, and there was nothing he could do about it. As Brian left Frida's apartment that day, his heart felt heavier than ever. He had gotten himself into a situation far beyond his control, and there was no way out. "Are you seeing someone else?" Sophia asked Brian one sunny afternoon, her voice trembling with uncertainty. She had just watched him sneak off to take a call again, something he had been doing far too often lately. He would always make sure to be alone when those calls came in, and it made her feel uneasy. Brian froze for a moment, but quickly composed himself. "Never, babe. he replied, forcing a soft smile. Why would you think like that? I can never cheat on you for anything in this world. Sophia's eyes searched his face for any sign of dishonesty. Then who do you constantly talk to in secret every time? She asked, her voice sad and filled with doubt. Brian let out a sigh, stepping closer to her, gently cupping her face in his hands. Babe, it's my business partners in China, he said smoothly. We are discussing a new project and it's taking more of my time. I am so sorry if I am making you feel this way, but you don't have to worry. I love you and I'd never hurt you like that. Sophia wanted to believe him. He had always been a good husband, and though she still had her suspicions, she chose to trust him. She nodded slowly, forcing a small smile. Okay, I believe you, she said quietly, but deep down, a nagging feeling lingered. Something wasn't right, and she could feel it, but she didn't want to push him further. A few months later, Frida gave birth to her twins, a beautiful boy and a girl. The excitement bubbled inside her as she held them in her arms for the first time. They were her children, her triumph, and she couldn't help but feel that she had finally won. But instead of going to the hospital Sophia and Brian had chosen, Frida had secretly registered at another hospital, one that only she and Brian knew about. They didn't want Sophia to find out, and this was the safest way to keep the secret. When Brian got the news that Frida had given birth, he rushed to the hospital, his heart pounding with mixed emotions. The sight of the twins made his heart swell with joy. He felt like he owned the world for a moment. His children were here, healthy and perfect, but even as he looked down at them, his joy was incomplete. Sophia still didn't know the truth, and now, with Frida refusing to give one of the twins to Sophia, the burden of his secret was heavier than ever. As Brian held the twins, a part of him wanted to tell Sophia everything. He imagined her holding one of those babies, smiling, her heart filled with the joy of motherhood. But he knew that wasn't going to happen. Not anymore. Back at home, Sophia's suspicions continued to grow stronger. She hadn't seen Frida in weeks. Every time she went to the apartment where Frida had been staying, it was empty. No one knew where Frida had gone, and Brian always brushed it off, telling her not to worry. One day, after another failed attempt to find Frida, Sophia confronted Brian again. Where is Frida, Brian? She asked, her voice trembling. I haven't seen her in weeks, and she's supposed to be carrying our baby. Something is wrong, and I can feel like you are hiding something from me, Brian. Brian felt the walls closing in. He had hoped Sophia wouldn't notice Frida's disappearance, at least not yet. He had been trying to keep everything under control, but the lie was becoming harder to manage. Sophia, calm down, Brian said, trying to keep his voice steady. Frida is fine. Don't you know she's with her family members? I thought she told you the last time you visited. Well, she's just been staying with her family for a bit. You know pregnancy can be stressful. I didn't want you to worry, so I didn't even mention it. Sophia looked at him, her eyes searching his face for the truth. I want to see her, Brian, she said, her voice determined. I've been waiting for so long, a moment I would hold my child. And now she's just disappeared. No, Brian, I need to see her. Brian's heart raced as he tried to think of what next to say. The truth was bound to come out sooner or later, and the longer he kept it hidden, the worse it would be. But before he could respond, Sophia's phone rang. It was the hospital she had originally chosen for Frida's care. They were calling to inform her that Frida had never returned for any follow-up appointment after her initial pregnancy checkups. Sophia's face drained of color as she ended the call. She turned to Brian, her eyes wide with realization. What have you done, Brian? What are you hiding from me? She asked, her voice cracking. Brian felt like the ground had opened up beneath him. The web of lies he had spun was unraveling, and he knew the truth would destroy everything. Sophia's voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes filling with tears. Brian, by my calculations, Frida is supposed to have given birth by now, but the hospital where we registered her just called to inform me now that she had stopped coming there for a while ago. What is happening? Why is my baby? Brian, what are you hiding from me? Please let me know if Frida has given birth. I need to know the truth. After all, the baby belongs to me. It's my eggs. I need to know the truth, Brian. What is going on? Sophia fell to the ground, her sobs breaking through her voice as she tried to make sense of the situation. Brian stood frozen, overwhelmed by guilt. He knelt beside her, his heart heavy with the weight of his secret. I am so sorry, Sophia, he began, his voice cracking. Everything is fine. I don't just know what to say. But I promise you, I will contact Frida tomorrow and find out what's going on. I'll figure it all out. Baby, please don't cry. Brian tried to comfort her, but Sophia wasn't convinced. She felt deep in her heart that something was terribly wrong. Despite Brian's reassurance, her instincts told her that he was still hiding something. She had no intention of waiting for him to fix it. Determined to uncover the truth on her own, she made plans to hire a private investigator to follow Brian and Frida. Days later, Sophia's suspicions were confirmed. She discovered that Frida had given birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Not only that, but Brian had bought Frida a new apartment and opened a jewelry shop for her in the city. He had been visiting Frida regularly, helping her with the babies. Sophia was devastated. She felt betrayed and humiliated. What Sophia didn't know yet was that the babies were not hers, not anymore. Frida had miscarried the original pregnancy, and the twins were a result of Brian's secret affair. As she wept bitterly over the betrayal, she decided to keep quiet about her discovery for now. She would confront Brian when the time was right. One evening, Sophia arranged a romantic picnic in their garden, hoping to get Brian to open up. As they sat down, she asked him, her voice steady but full of pain, Brian, why did you change everything? Why did you open a jewelry store for Frida? Why did you get her a new apartment? And why did you change the hospital where we registered her? Brian's heart raced. He had been caught. His carefully constructed lies were crumbling. Kneeling before Sophia, he broke down and confessed everything. How Frida had miscarried, how he had made a terrible mistake by sleeping with her, and how the twins were not Sophia's children, but his and Frida's. Sophia couldn't believe what she was hearing. The man she had trusted and loved had betrayed her in the worst possible way. She felt numb as Brian begged for her forgiveness, but the damage was too deep. She needed time to process it all. In the days that followed, Sophia made a decision. She told Brian that she wanted a divorce. Brian, desperate and broken, fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Please, baby, don't go. I swear, I'll die if you leave me. You are my world, my heart and soul. If you go, I won't survive this. Please, honey, don't go. Sophia, though hurt beyond measure, looked at him with pity. She told him there was only one way she would consider staying. Brian had to take the twins from Frida and send her away, out of their lives for good. They would pay her off, maybe even 20 million naira, but she had to leave the country and never return. Brian, not wanting to lose Sophia, agreed immediately. He was willing to do anything to fix the mess he had created. Over the next few weeks, he and Sophia worked with their lawyer to build a case against Frida for breaching their original surrogacy agreement. The plan was to use the legal system to gain custody of the twins and then pay Frida enough money to make her leave the country and never return. Brian thought it was the only way to salvage what was left of their marriage. However, when their lawyer contacted Frida, informing her of the charges, Frida was furious. She couldn't believe that Brian, the man who had fathered her children and promised her the world, was now turning against her. She felt betrayed and humiliated. All the demands she had made, all the control she thought she had over Brian, it had all crumbled in an instant. She tried calling Brian repeatedly, but he ignored every call. She felt desperate, betrayed, cornered, and out of options. That is when her hunger turned into something dark. Frida wasn't going to let Sophia take Brian or the twins away from her. She couldn't stand the thought of being discarded like trash after everything she had been through. She was willing to do anything to keep her new life intact, even if it meant doing the unthinkable. In her desperation, Frida hired a notorious assassin. She didn't want Sophia in the picture anymore. If Sophia was gone, Brian would have no choice but to be with her. They could raise their twins together without Sophia standing in their way. She gave the assassin clear instructions: take Sophia out of the equation permanently. Frida believed that once Sophia was gone, Brian would come back to her. She convinced herself that Brian's love for Sophia had to be weak if he had cheated with her. He would grieve, but he would eventually accept his new life with Frida and the twins. As the days passed, Frida waited anxiously, expecting the news of Sophia's death to come at any moment. But little did she know, Sophia had been one step ahead. The private investigator Sophia had hired had been watching Frida closely, tracking her every move. When Frida met with the assassin, the investigator captured everything and the evidence was handed over to Sophia. Sophia couldn't believe that Frida had stooped so low as to plan her murder. The betrayal was like a knife in her heart, but this time it wasn't just about the twins or Brian's infidelity. This was about survival. Sophia took the evidence to the police immediately and Frida was arrested before the assassin could carry out his plan. Brian was shocked when he heard the news. He had known that Frida was manipulative, but he never imagined that she would go as far as trying to have Sonia killed. Frida sat in the courtroom, her hands trembling as she listened to the judge's final words. The courtroom was silent and all eyes were on her as the judge pronounced the sentence: 35 years in prison for attempted murder. The weight of the words hit her like a crushing wave. In that moment, Frida knew her life was over. Everything she had schemed and plotted for had fallen apart. She had believed foolishly that she could manipulate Brian and secure a life of wealth and comfort with the twins. But now, as she stood in handcuffs, her dreams shattered. Reality finally sank in. There would be no luxurious life, no happy family with Brian and the twins. Instead, she would spend the prime years of her life behind bars alone. The courtroom began to clear out, but Frida barely noticed. Her mind was spinning with regret, anger, and disbelief. She had once been just a poor fruit seller, scraping by day. When she agreed to be a surrogate for Brian and Sophia, she saw it as an opportunity to change her life. But greed and desperation had consumed her. Instead of the 5 million naira she was promised, she had wanted more. She had used her pregnancy to manipulate Brian, thinking she could hold on to him forever. But it was all gone now. Brian and Sophia were there, sitting silently as the verdict was read. Sophia, though still wounded by everything that had happened, felt a small sense of relief. Frida was finally out of their lives for good, and she could no longer pose a threat to their future. But the scars of Frida's betrayal remained, and the pain would not disappear overnight. Brian, on the other hand, was filled with mixed emotions. He had once felt pity for Frida, but seeing her now, sentenced to spend most of her life in prison, filled him with guilt. He had played a part in her downfall, and while he knew she had made her own choices, he couldn't shake the feelings that things could have turned out differently if he had been honest from the start, but it was too late for those thoughts now. As Frida was let out of the courtroom in chains, she glanced back one last time at Brian. She had thought that love, or at least control, would keep them connected. But now, all she saw in his eyes was pity. It was the final blow, and she turned away, feeling the cold grip of reality tighten around her. In the end, Frida had lost everything: the money, the children, and even her freedom. As she was taken to the prison van, she thought about the years ahead. Years she would spend behind bars, counting each day in regret. She had gambled everything on a life that wasn't meant to be hers, and now she would pay the price. Brian and Sophia left the courtroom together, unsure of what the future held for them. They had survived Frida's schemes, but their relationship was still fragile. The road ahead would be difficult, but at least now the shadow of Frida no longer hung around them. For Frida, the sentence marked the end of her story. In her cell, she sat alone, her thoughts consumed by what could have been, knowing she had only herself to blame. The 35 years stretched out before her like an endless desert, and with each passing day, she knew that her dreams had crumbled, leaving nothing but emptiness in their place. After the storm passed, Brian and Sophia took custody of the twins, a boy and a girl, and welcomed them into their home with open hearts. Despite all the pain and betrayal, Sophia, guided by the love she still had for her husband, decided to forgive Brian. She knew that holding on to anger would only hurt their family in the long run, and she believed in giving their marriage a second chance. Together, they focused on the future. The twins were a blessing, innocent and full of life, and Brian and Sophia poured all their love, care, and attention into raising them. Every day, they were reminded of the gift they had received, the chance to build a family they had always dreamed of. Brian, filled with gratitude for Sophia's forgiveness, worked hard to regain her trust. He made sure to be the husband and father his family needed. He never let a day go by without showing Sophia how much he loved and cherished her, and slowly their bond began to heal. Sophia, too, found peace in caring for the twins. She showered them with love, never letting them feel the weight of the past. She and Brian created a warm, nurturing environment for their children, and their home was filled with laughter once again. As the year passed, the couples rebuilt their relationship. Their home was no longer filled with secret and lies, but with honesty, support, and love. The initial spark of love they had for each other returned, stronger than ever, as they walked through their struggles together. The twins grew up in a home where they were loved deeply, given everything they needed to strive. They were surrounded by the affection of two parents who, despite the challenges they faced, had come out stronger on the other side. Brian and Sophia's family became complete once more, and their home was filled with joy and love. A true testament to the power of forgiveness and resilience. Together, Brian and Sophia built a new life, raising their children in love and unity. Their journey had not been easy, but they had found their way back to each other, and their family became their greatest source of happiness. The end.